Ready to go.
Everybody, welcome to our August meeting of the Environment and Climate Committee. Sorry, we're kind of getting settled a little bit. Got my summer hair, summer brain. Folks online, Kelly, Mark, Lauren, can one of you let us know if you can hear us well?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started with our roll call. We have two new ECC members here, and I know there's a number of folks joining online that are traveling. Thank you for being here. So we'll just start with that. Oh, hi, Covey. We'll start with roll call and just say if you're present. Alex, how do you pronounce your last name?
Cerusi.
Alex Cerusi.
Present.
Andrew is excused. Covey? Here. Kelly?
Here.
Laura Tabor?
Here.
Lauren Frazier?
Here.
Mark Buckley?
Here, but I'll be on video soon, hopefully.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Mark let me know he's joining on phone right now, and he'll get connected a little bit later into the meeting. Neil Bonsgard, I'm here. Rory? Here. Serena?
Here.
And Smita?
Here.
Perfect. Okay. And then are any of our ex officios here? Sasha or Jackie? Doesn't look like it. And welcome Councillor Norris as well, joining online. So we'll go ahead and get started with the minutes. Did everyone get a copy of the minutes, and does anybody have any comments on the minutes from our last meeting?
No comments. I would move to approve them.
Great. All in favor of approving, or sorry, well, we don't have to, and Robert's rules vote minutes, do we? Okay, great. Any objections to the minutes? How about that? Not hearing any, the minutes are approved. Our next section is our public comment period, and it does look like we have somebody online, so I think we have a slide for that process. Thanks for getting the slides up. Perfect timing.
Can we get that slide? Bear with me a second.
Well, while we're getting the slide up, okay, good. We will be able to invite folks to unmute, and then we have a 2-minute time period or time limit, and just
Sorry, guys.
or we can just skip the slide and do it manually if that's easier. Okay. Do you want to invite Doreen?
Okay, Doreen is allowed to talk.
Great. So you should be able to unmute, and then we don't have the slide up. Just keep in mind that we have a 2-minute clock. Do you want to see if we can hear you, Doreen? It looks like you've been able to unmute.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thanks.
Good morning. I did send you an email, and thank you for giving me a chance to talk today. I wanted to Central Oregon aviation has really grown, like 80% just since the pandemic. And I'm just not seeing that or hearing that in any of our conversations regarding climate. And the city of Bend has exempted it from their climate goals. You know, that's just not included. They're not meeting, they're actually exceeding with the airports. You know, species and habitats across the world are just burning to the ground or getting flooded away. And, you know, just because we're not getting it this year doesn't mean it's not one of the worst years on record. And for us to have, you know, thousands and thousands of flight hours from our airports is unacceptable. And for that not to be counted into emissions is just an absolute crime. And the species that are removed and habitats removed for these airports, you know, there's, sorry, I lost my notes, so I'm trying to go off memory here. And there's hundreds of thousands of flight hours every year just from Bend Municipal Airport alone, and millions of gallons of fossil fuel. And only about 4% of that is or ever will be necessary or essential. And we just really need to keep that as part of all climate conversations. And, you know, we can't make enough EVs or climate goals to offset these antiquated, you know, many of the flight school planes are 50 years old. So, you know, even if we just get better emissions, and, you know, carbon offsetting doesn't work, and there's no such thing as sustainable aviation yet. So until there is, we shouldn't be basing our assumptions off of what might be. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for reaching out, Doreen. Not seeing any other attendees, but we also welcome people to provide public comment at any of our meetings. Agenda item. Okay, great. Okay, so moving on to, well, actually, before we do staff updates, maybe we can do some brief committee intros. There's a lot of, well, we've had 2 stages of adding new folks to the committee in the last year. And so there's, yeah, a lot of new people, new leadership. So do you want to give brief sentence intros and then we can introduce our new folks too? You want to start, Kevin?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kavi Choksi. I am the vice chair of the ECC, and I've been here since its start 2.5 years ago now. And I'm part of the waste and materials group as well. And also I'm representing the ECC on the TRUAC, the Tree Regulation Update Advisory Committee, a mouthful. And then I also work right now currently part-time for the Environmental Center. And I'm switching to full-time, which I haven't announced to the committee yet. I'm starting September 1st.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Neil Bonsgard. I am the chair of the ECC and am on the transportation and energy subcommittees. And then I also represent the ECC in the system development charge working group, which we'll maybe do a quick update of that process later on. So there's lots of opportunities that the city will ask committees to provide representation for. And it's a pretty common process and an opportunity to share ECC perspectives in ongoing city processes. So tree code, system development charge, there's a lot of different groups that are, I think there's like 5 different groups that ECC members are serving on right now.
Hi, so I'm Rory Isbell. I've also been on the ECC since its inception almost 3 years ago now. Hard to believe when Covey said 2.5. It's been that long. My day job, I'm an attorney for a local land use and environmental nonprofit. I also volunteer on the board of the Oregon Citizens Utility Board of Oregon, a utility ratepayer advocacy organization. I'm on the ECC's current transportation subcommittee, and when I heard Covey and Neil list all the other volunteer things that they're doing on behalf of this committee right now, I started to feel guilty that I'm not doing it. But we cycle in and out of things. So yeah, nice to meet you.
Hello, I'm Smitha Mehta. I joined this committee in January, so one of the newbies. My day job, I work for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and water quality, but for the committee, I'm on the waste and materials working group. So new topic for me, but interesting. Hi, everyone. This is my first meeting. I'm Alex Cerusi, and so I'm looking forward to learning more about the working groups or subcommittees and hopefully getting involved. In my day job, I am an animal and environmental attorney and lobbyist, focusing mostly on state policy work. And I also serve in a volunteer capacity as chair of the board of Harmony Farm Sanctuary. Yeah, I'm just very excited to be a part of this team, so thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Tabor. This is also my first ACC meeting. Excited to join you all and learn more. My background is in energy and in climate policy, and I currently work in my day job in state climate policy work. So excited to learn about more ways to get involved.
I got feedback from somebody that they are only hearing me and everyone else sounds like they're really far away from the mics, but
We might need to move
Or-
this closer.
We have some volume boosters. They didn't get
Okay.
charged last night.
Okay.
So, just make sure that when you're speaking, you're speaking directly. into the mic.
because these are only mics. Yeah. Are we set to the right microphone? It's not like coming out of your computer or anything. Okay. Okay, just kidding. We may, yeah, just talk into the mic. Make sure it's facing at you.
We continue to get
Sounds like
feedback.
Laura was able to be heard too. So
Awesome.
let's go online to our folks on the phone, and then we'll do some quick staff intros for the new committee members too. But I should call on people, but I lost my Zoom window. Mark. Oh, he's probably the one that.
Yeah, actually, I'm sorry, everyone. I'm on a shuttle right now. I just got off a flight here in Dallas, but I've been on the committee since the start, if you can hear me. And I'm on the Utility Public Advisory Group as a representative for ECC, as well as now a short-term transportation utility fee advisory group. My day job, an environmental economist with Equin Northwest. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. We'll do Serena next.
Hello, I've been with the ECC since the beginning. I'm currently part of the waste and materials subgroup. I am a business consultant in the sustainability realm, mostly focusing on beverage manufacturing, but venture into other business avenues as well. So I welcome all the new members. Excited to get started.
Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ECC. I've been on the committee since the inception, as a few others have noted. I'm in the waste and materials group, and my day job is head of sustainability for my organization in the tech world, focused mainly in data centers.
Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Lauren Fraser. I've been on the committee since January, and I'm on the energy subcommittee. And in my day job, I help lead a startup that helps people decarbonize their homes and transportation.
Awesome. I think that's everybody on the committee that's here. Am I missing anybody? Okay, great. Do you want to introduce yourself, Mary?
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Mary Winters. I'm the city attorney. And because this is one of the highest functioning committees, I take this committee. And I was on sabbatical for a few months, so another attorney covered it, but I'm back. So welcome to the new members. Thank you.
Welcome back.
Thank you for that.
And I just wanted to say hi, Counselor Norris here. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I'm in between meetings today, but welcome to all the new members and happy to be a resource for you all.
And hello, everyone. I had the chance to meet you over email. Laura and Alex, welcome. I'm Kate Schneider. I'm a senior management analyst in the city manager's office. I just have the honor of filling in for my colleague Cassie, who's away on parental leave until October. So I have spent a lot of years in local government. I'm a generalist, not a sustainability expert. So I can be your help and connection to the city. And of course, your fellow committee members are a great source of context and history for this group. But I did just want to let you know too, I don't know if you got the onboarding, that this summer, the focus of the group while Cassie's on leave has really been reviewing the remaining actions in our community climate action plan. So broken into working groups, as you know, that we're going to talk about one of them today. So each working group is really tasked with identifying what they think the committee should prioritize to work on in the next biennium, the next 2 years. And then each working group has a chance to discuss with the group their recommendations and get feedback. So this is what we'll be doing today with the Waste and Materials Group. And you should get an invitation if you want to join one of the committees. There will be still more work to do too. So welcome. This group also last year spent a lot of time working on a home energy score program that just went live in July. So I've also been, just as an update for all of you, really helping work on that program and fielding a lot of questions as we got off the ground. So it is in operation, and you can go on the Green Building Registry and see what a home energy score report looks like for Bend. There are several out there, or tons out there. So just fun thing to be aware of is those are publicly accessible. You can go view them. What's up?
I'm Melissa Mitch. I'm the staff support for one more day before I leave the city of Bend. And you guys will have somebody new in this position at some point.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Pauline, we'll do tree code in a little bit. Did you have other staff updates besides the home energy score?
Nope, really
Okay,
just
great.
if you need anything between now and October, I'm your person. Thank
Great.
you.
Okay, wonderful. So our two main agenda items today are the waste and materials working group discussion. We have an hour for that. We also have a tree code update. And then there's, which are both kind of longer expected times. And then there's a couple of smaller things. I'm talking about the CFEC, the Climate Friendly Areas Working Group. There's some brief updates from the transportation utility fee and system development charge processes. And then we'll agenda review and adjourn. So we're going to try to squeeze all of that in, but I wanted to offer, if you wanted to go first, we could swap our longer pieces. So then we can do the tree code update first and then do waste and materials, if that works for everybody.
Yeah, I think that works, just as long as we still keep enough time for because we do have a lengthy presentation. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, sorry if you didn't get the early warning, but we'll welcome Pauline Hardy from the city, and Covey is also serving on the committee. So we had asked, because things were early when we were just assigning a member to the committee, there was more questions than answers in terms of where the process was going. So we kind of had planned on an update. Yeah. Another fun acronym.
It looks relevant.
That's more detailed.
Yeah.
Tree Regulation Update Advisory Committee. I just like calling it a tree code committee.
I know, it's so much simpler.
They should have gone for an acronym that was TREE.
Oh, that would be
I thought about it.
It took us a while to come up with TREE. So I'm Pauline Hardy. I'm with the City of Bend Planning Department, and what I do is just update the Bend Development Code. So when we have amendments like the tree code, I am the one that will make sure that it goes through the public process, the planning commission hearings, the city council, and receive the feedback from the public in general too on the updates. And I do work with different committees just to make sure they are aware of what is being proposed. And I appreciate the opportunity to come here today to early on to keep you informed, and then for you to help Kavi with feedback so that when he participates in the TRUAC meetings, he represents this committee. So So especially because we have some new members, the council direction when they asked staff to start looking into updating the tree code was 5 different steps. So the first one is we have 3 codes today that regulate trees, and there's a lot of inconsistencies between the codes. So we have the Bend code, which talks about clearing and grading and when tree removals are permitted or have to be preserved. We have the Bend Development Code, which is in the landscape chapter, which focuses on tree preservation. However, the Bend Development Code regulations are pretty gray, so they're not real strong, and that's one reason we're updating the codes. And then we have the standards and specs, chapter 12, which also has a landscaping chapter in it. And there's just inconsistencies between all 3 of these codes. They're not clear and objective, which they need to be, and they're not real strong when it comes to tree preservation. So number 1, we're going to provide consistency between the codes. Number 2, we're going to make sure whatever standards True Act comes up with that we bring before the Planning Commission, City Council are clear and objective. So we don't want to use the word may, we want to say you must preserve this number of trees. And then if you don't, we'll have some mitigation available. And then number 3, which is what True Act is focusing on right now in the past couple meetings. And this is the scope of the project, is to consider standards for larger trees similar to the Southeast Area Plan. So Southeast Area Plan has a stronger tree preservation section in it than any of the codes we have in Bend. And I think it's 24 inches or greater, 50% of those have to be preserved. And so that was just kind of a starting point to for True Act to start looking at what's it mean to preserve larger trees. And so I'll show you what we've been going through, what True Act has so far, a majority of the committee anyways has agreed upon, and the next steps. Number 4, which will be 2 meetings from next week, True Act is going to consider alternatives to preserving trees, because in a lot of cases, developers are not going to be able to preserve the trees or whatever % we come up with. So we want to make sure that if they do remove trees, that there's mitigation. So either there'll be an in lieu fee or a tree replacement on site. So True Act hasn't discussed this yet, so that's coming as one of the next meetings, and I believe that one is the last one in September, August. And then once we're through this process to work with our GIS department, because we need to come up with some type of inventory program so that when we do have in lieu or replacement standards, that we know where in town there's a lack of trees, so we can spend those fees or monies in those areas to increase the urban canopy. So this is what True Act has worked on so far. One was, the first discussion was what trees need to be regulated. When we say regulated, this is just the starting point. This is when a developer comes in with an application and we want to know what trees are on the site. So we need them to map them and inventory them. And so True Act had a big discussion on whether or not juniper should even be included in this mapping, which the consensus or majority was, yes, we're going to include junipers. All trees are going to be treated equally when it comes to just mapping them for the application. And so they discussed what is currently in the Bend Development Code, which is 6 inches for deciduous trees and 10 inches for coniferous. Another option that was discussed was 6 inches still for deciduous, increasing the size of junipers to 12 inches, and then keeping the 10 inches for all other coniferous trees. And we have 2 arborists on our committee who have provided a wealth of knowledge to the committee, because a lot of us are not tree experts. And one of the arborists recommended 6 inches across the board. Why treat trees any differently based on their DBH? So the committee took a vote, and the recommendation as of today, and this could change depending on how our conversations go, is mapping will be 6 inches for all trees, no matter what kind. So that was the first one. And then the second discussion and vote was for what we're calling priority trees. So these are the trees that the council asked staff to come back with a code to preserve larger trees. So planners were calling them super significant, because today we call them significant. So we're just going to call them priority trees. So we have regulated trees and our priority trees. And so for the priority trees, after discussion, staff presented 3 options, and it was option number one, to keep, well, what's in the Bend Development Code today, which is too small. Number two was the 20 inches. And number three was the 24 inches, regardless of the type of tree. There was some discussion of increasing that for junipers, but the committee just didn't seem as interested in that. And they landed on the 20 inch for the priority trees. And I didn't know, Kavi, if you wanted to give any like background on the discussion for the 20 inch trees, how they came about. I have a little bit, but I thought if you wanted.
Yeah, I think I can maybe share a little bit. I think the consensus, especially after again, hearing from the arborists who were also supportive of 20, even though I know one of the arborists, Chris, said he was more conflicted than it seemed, but was to go for 20 inches. I think we looked at many of the numbers, which I think you're going to share more of, but it seemed to make more sense to look at that. But I do think some of this will depend on the percentages part too, because it goes hand in hand. One of the concerns I had shared during that meeting was not ending up in a situation where, because we're reducing the size to 20 inches, that we're now preserving some trees between 20 and 24 inches at the cost of taking down 24-inch trees based on the percentage of trees that need to be preserved. That makes sense. So if they have to preserve, let's say 50% of trees, I wouldn't want it to have the opposite intended effect of then like bigger trees going down and smaller trees staying up, if that makes sense. But at least the consensus for the whole committee was 20-inch trees, which is how I voted as well for that decision.
Yep, that sounds, and I would just add, I think the 20-inch too it provides a little bit more flexibility because there's going to be more 20-inch or larger trees on site than 24 inches. So if we do have, when we come up with a percentage of preservation, if the site is difficult or if they're putting in a lot of housing, it just provides more flexibility if we start at 20 inches versus 24 inches. And there's more trees that are going to meet this criteria than if we started higher at 24. So this is what we will be talking about next week on Thursday. And I assume it's probably gonna take the whole meeting. Preservation options. So now we know we are mapping trees that are 6 inches or greater. We know there's support for calling priority trees 20 inches or greater. The next step is saying, well, what percent of these trees are we going to require for preservation? And we've been using this one example from Portland, which is options 1, 2, and 3 up on the board or up on the screen, which focuses on saving priority trees first. And these are from Portland, saving priority trees first and preserving just an overall DBH on site. And in a lot of cases, when you save like 100% in option 1, for example, the priority trees, that DBH is in excess of the 20%. So you're not necessarily going to be saving a lot of smaller trees if you're saving 100% of the larger trees. And what Chris, our arborist, did make a good point. Like there is benefits to saving a lot of the smaller trees too. And the way he describes it is when construction happens, younger trees bounce back a lot quicker than the older trees. Just like humans, the younger you are, something happens, you recover a lot faster. And so that kind of stuck with me. And so as you start thinking about the percentages, or as TRUAC does, the goal is council scope is to definitely look at preserving larger trees, but also just preserving, trees in general on the site and providing that flexibility so that we still are able to preserve trees on the property. So number 1, 2, and 3, like I said, are from Portland. And then I started putting together a lot of examples of trying to see how number 1, 2, and 3 work in some of our current development applications. And I would say, I'm not sure any of them actually are ever met that high a percent on tree coverage. And again, our code today doesn't really require it. So they haven't had to preserve these numbers. And then the more I looked at it, looking at, instead of focusing just on priority trees, number 4 and 5 is just an option that we're going to give to the committee next week on reducing the amount or percentages, but with 4 and 5, there wouldn't be allowed overlap. So like in number 1, 2, and 3, if your priority trees have a high enough DBH that it actually covers the total percent of the DBH, you're fine. Whereas in 3, 4, and 5, you have to preserve both types of trees, 20% of each or 25% of each. And next week, we're going to look at a table that I put together, and it's full of numbers and full of projects that I've been running this, all these percents on, to see like, are our developments getting close? Is it even possible to do these percentages? And then number 6, 7, and 8 would allow the overlap, because now we're starting to increase. And this is what TRUAC is going to go over next week, is what percent are they comfortable with requiring developers to implement when they submit projects. And these projects, when I talk about projects, is larger projects. So land divisions, when we're creating new residential subdivisions, partitions, commercial developments, mixed use developments. This isn't for the smaller, like build a quadplex and you have to comply. It's only for the larger projects that go through what we call land division applications or site plan review applications.
Can I ask a quick question about that? So is there no tree code applicability or tree regulation applicability unless you're in those categories that you're talking about?
Well,
Or is there a separate lesser standard for smaller?
so if a lot is created through a land division process for a quadplex, the tree regulation kicks in at the land division process.
Okay.
It's going to be those smaller infill lots that are already created that are maybe 6,000 square feet or less. They're going to build a quadplex on it. There is no, this project does not apply to those.
Okay.
One thing we are looking at internally is those projects don't even require street trees. And part of this code update is updating the street tree list. So I've been working with a lot of arborists to increase the number of trees that are options for the city, and also take away the ones that shouldn't even be on our list. And then looking at when those street tree regulations apply. And right now, if you build a house, a duplex, a triplex, a quadplex on infill properties, you do not have to put in street trees. So we might come back with a recommendation to council, because this preservation doesn't apply to them, but we want to increase the urban canopy. We can do it through street trees on those smaller properties, which we don't get to today.
I think Rory had his hand first, but then I also want to make a note. Go ahead.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm wondering if, as we consider the potential preservation percentages, it seems to me that that decision kind of goes in tandem with what we might be thinking about for the non-clear and objective discretionary path. And, you know, trying to think, if I'm a developer and I'm trying to choose which path to go, you know, you're going to see which works for whatever project you have in mind. Does that make sense? Is that conversation happening like in tandem?
So we are not going to propose a non-discretionary path, a discretionary path, because we're proposing mitigation. So either you are going to comply with the code, and if you can't comply with the code, you will be required to do the in lieu payment or on site. So there's not a true like discretionary path, it's mitigation.
So will the mitigation be sort of across the board? It'll be the same, or will it depend on?
We haven't had that discussion
Yeah,
yet. So
okay,
TRUAC is going to meet the last week. I think it's April. It's got to be adopted by then. August 30th is when TRUAC is going to review that. And I have a lot of examples from other cities on the replacement and fee in lieu processes that they have. But as of right now, I think one thing I have heard TRUAC say is that a developer cannot come in and do 100% mitigation. We're still going to come up with a percent that has to remain on site, and then the rest of it could be mitigated, but they can't just like clear. This is what I've heard so far with the discussions we've had. They haven't voted or anything on it, but that's my sense.
The thing we will have to consider, because the statute on needed housing has the clear and objective standard that we all hear about a lot. It also has the language on your standards, conditions, and processes can't have the effect of having unreasonable cost and delay. And that is now becoming a bigger issue that cities are having to face. And this is kind of a classic regulation that is becoming a concern for us to have, and something like a fee in lieu. We just have to think, and the committee's going to have to think about it. it's already been raised that unreasonable cost and delay, there are other issues on site. There's, because we have to contain stormwater on site, because there are other things on site. And we're also balancing housing and density, which we desperately want and need in Bend because we are urbanizing and we need not just affordable housing, but we need housing. So the unreasonable cost and delay standard has to be balanced with the kind of conditions we can put and the fees in lieu. And so it's just part of the mix. And that statute has those two parts to it.
I guess that balance that you just described.
Is the one that we have to think, exactly, is what we have to think about. And other cities have, but every city is a little different and the trees here are different. So we have to be a little cognizant of looking at the valley and their codes and then look at the trees that we have in Central Oregon and the situation in
Not a
Central
lot of good
Oregon.
comparisons, but
Yeah.
We're trying to find some.
Yeah.
Flagstaff?
Huh? Yep, I looked there.
I don't
Their
know what
code's
their codes are
okay.
like, but they've got a similar tree canopy.
Yeah.
Plus a
I
couple
looked, they have
cactuses.
Boise, Coeur d'Alene. I'm trying to think of other ones, but some are good. I mean, obviously the ones in the valley just have some really strong tree preservation codes and their fees are pretty consistent on the in lieu, around $600 per tree. Except Portland's is like $1,800 per tree if it's 20 inches or less. And then if it's over 20 inches, I believe it's $450 per DVH. So it's extremely high. And my understanding is it's to discourage people to do the in lieu and to actually preserve trees. But I think we have to have our costs based on actual cost. And which, looking at all the other cities, looks like it's around $600 per tree.
Yeah, well, and the needed housing statute has been amended more and recently, so we also have to be a little cognizant of current law.
And Mary will help me with that.
Yeah.
When you say actual cost of what?
So from what I've read on the other ones, and you can help me too, Mary, when they pay an in lieu, it's for staff's time to plant the tree, the cost of the tree, the equipment, like there's a lot you take into account to get that tree planted. And where is it going to be planted? That's going to be from our hopefully mapping system. But the fee, I think, has to be based on cost. Can't just be an arbitrary number.
So just to clarify, that's just the actual cost of the tree, but not the impacts like the carbon impacts or any other impacts of losing a mature tree.
Don't think.
Okay.
It might be, I've seen some codes that compare cost to the loss of the cost of the tree. So if it's a super significant tree, it's going to cost more. And I've seen codes base it off that. And I've done some research on it, not 100% because TRUAC has not gotten to that point yet. But we'll keep you informed on when they do.
And I'm sure we could go down in detail on all of these things, which is really hard when we get updates to not, because there's a ton of things I'm curious about too. We have an environmental economist on the committee too, that I'm sure could provide plenty of alternative options as well. But we only have less than 10 minutes left. So if you want to.
It's my last slide.
Okay, great.
I just wanted to highlight, so these are some of the projects I've been looking at. Real quick, Sky Vista is a single unit development. I think it's like 50 or 60 single family residential lots on the northeast side. Poplar is a much smaller development. It's like at less than an acre with 5 or 6 units. Or no, Poplar, that is not right. Poplar is much smaller. I got to fix that acreage there. It's like 0.54 and it's a cottage development done by Core. Century Mixed Use is going up cross street from Safeway, and I'm sure we all saw that there's no trees left on that site, but it is a mixed use development. There's no setback requirements, and they had at the time a parking requirement. So there was a lot of topography and good reasons, I think, on that site to remove the trees, maybe not all of them. Viridian is a 55 and older multi-unit development that is going in on the northwest side. Caraway Master Plan, this is just phase 1, a combination of single family and different types of housing. Parkside Place is a larger master plan area. I believe that's an affordable housing project on the northeast side as well. And then the Bree is down by the Old Mill District multi-unit development. And the Bulletin is where the old Bulletin building was on the northwest side, multi-unit. And so what I did is I was looking at the number of trees on each of these properties, the actual DVH for each of these trees, and what percent are they actually preserving compared to what was on the site. The number of trees that are 20 inches or greater, and then what did the developer in the end actually propose to preserve. And again, our code today is very lenient on removal of trees, so they didn't have to preserve a ton. And I just highlighted for TRUAC's discussion next week, ones that are at least 20% or greater. So you could see like the Poplar Little Cottage development. This one, they were able to preserve a lot of trees because they had a significant topography. And so they left that area untouched, which was fortunate because they didn't touch any of the trees that was in that area. The Viridian, which is surprising on the northwest side because our committee's had a lot of discussion about how junipers are on the east side and ponderosas are on the west side. Viridian was like 90% junipers and it's on the northwest side. So I'm glad we kept junipers in the mix because you never know which sites are going to have a majority of pondos or junipers. But they only preserved 3 out of 14 trees that are 20 inches or greater, which in the case, if you do percentages, that is over 20%. Caraway, being a master plan, a lot of the master plans are more fortunate because they're required to preserve 20% of the site in open space, 10 or 20%. And in that open space, they're able to preserve trees. So that's why their percentages are a little bit higher. And then the 2 multi-unit developments, the Bree has a large easement on it in the corner. So it's undevelopable. And fortunately, there's a whole bunch of trees in there. So they were able to preserve them. And then the Bulletin site has significant topography. And a lot of developers will probably go in and just say they have to grade it because of the topography. This development did not do that. And so they were able to preserve a number of significant trees on the site and overall DBH as well. So those are just a starting talking point for our TRUAC committee meeting next week. And then I have another slide to share with them that is way more detailed with a lot more numbers for us to go over to start really diving into those percentages that I originally showed you. And that, I think I probably just have the next steps. So our next meeting's on the 17th. The 30th is when we will talk about the fee in lieu and the on-site tree preservation standards. And then if all goes as planned, I should hopefully have a rough draft for TRUAC to review on September 20th. Still on track, possibly to get to hearings and adoption by the end of the year.
Thank you. And I was just going to add a couple more pieces of information to that. Thanks, Pauline. I think you covered a lot of information, and these meetings have been really full of, I've been learning a lot. I do not come to it with a lot of tree knowledge, so it's been fun in that way. Just in terms of discussion and what would be helpful for me, and I think for Pauline for TRUAC in terms of ECC kind of being able to provide input for the next meeting and upcoming couple meetings. So 2 things I want to share. One is, at least I see my purpose as what has been hard is understanding the trade-offs between saving trees and especially housing. So I see it as incentivizing saving as many trees, especially priority as possible, without unreasonably impeding necessary housing, which is a really tough balance to do those 2 things, which I think is what all the members of TRUAC are kind of wrestling with. Especially in the last meeting, we learned that some of what we wanted to do would end up being too much of an impediment, at least hearing from developers, or might be in the future as we decide percentages. And otherwise, we were doing nothing, and we're still, majority of trees are still being cut down. So I think finding that necessary balance. The second part I just wanted to mention is, unfortunately, I'll be missing the next meeting of TRUAC. I'm going to be out on vacation all of next week, and the next meeting is on Thursday. But I still wanted to have an opportunity for the committee to kind of talk about kind of main things that come up for the preservation side. And then if possible, I can send an email to Pauline in advance of the meeting with those thoughts as well. So we have some time now, but also after this meeting, if you wanted to email it to me, I can compile it and send it to Pauline that way as well.
And then I can share it with TRUAC next week.
Yeah. And if any members of the committee are interested in, is there public comment for TRUAC as well? So if any members of the committee, looking at you, Rory, because I know you mentioned wanting to be more involved and you'd express interest in TRUAC, but yeah, that's also another opportunity to provide comment as well.
Are there specific topics or questions that you want this committee to consider? Or?
It's such a big discussion next week. It'd be great if you could say, Kavi, this is what we want for next week, like what percentages, would work, but there's a lot of details that go into what percentages work. And that's what we'll talk about next week with TRUAC. But I'm sure if you had some suggestions, it'd be great to share them with TRUAC.
I wonder, I'm just thinking out loud. One of the pieces that maybe is like of the kind of benefits of trees component that the ECC is kind of connected with might be around like heat stress or urban heat island effect stuff. Like, I don't know if that's come up or if there have been any studies shared or anything like that. Like maybe if we could provide that component. I'm not sure what expertise you have or kind of where those pieces are, but just I think in the percentage question in particular of recognizing it's not just a battle of like, we want a ton, we can build way more if we put none on, but like, what percentages are actually accomplishing some of those shading goals?
That'd be helpful.
I'm trying to make the connection of like where what might be ECC connected.
The GIS mapping for mitigation trees, that would be helpful. So we can see where those heat islands are. Help identify priority ones, I guess.
And we don't have a mapping system in place now. I've been meeting with our GIS department to see what information we have that we can pull from. And then I believe through ODF, there might be another program that we could tap into to help us with that. And then there might be a grant out there too that we might apply for to help fund some of this. Because again, with the mitigation for the fee and lieu, we need that mapping system so that we can know where we need to be planting the trees. Some of the cities have the most amazing mapping systems. It'd be great if we had it.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add one more thing is one thought I had, especially looking at the CCAP a lot for our waste and materials presentation that we're going to do soon, is that there's no mention of trees in it. And especially knowing how many trees are being cut down with development right now, just like thinking about the impact, the carbon impact of losing that many trees is not being considered as part of the community climate action plan right now. And I think that's a pretty big kind of blind spot.
Yeah, I guess that'll come up in our.
I know we're short on time. Do we want to think about like the percentage options and try to?
Do you think it would be better if, Pauline, are you able to share those slides, including the more detailed one that you didn't show us with the ECC through Kate?
Just take it with, we're still
Unless-
reviewing the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you have some, if you have some quick thoughts on it.
Or Mary.
Well, council's direction was really towards significant trees and being sure we were preserving housing. So I just want to be cognizant of the scope of this project. I think the replanting and the input on, bearing in mind that unlike Portland, we don't have a department, but the connection between what we should do with any fees coming in, I think would be helpful, like the looking at the city. This is it quickly becomes complicated because we also have this high wildfire risk. So we also have a whole nother department talking to homeowners on where not to put vegetation because of wildfire risk. So that again, it's a complicated topic, but help in where to replant, both for urban canopy and shading, also considering wildfire risk with some expert advice would be helpful. I think that would be a role for the ECC if we had people on it, because legally, I think about if we're going to take money from developers, we can't just take money and put it in a bucket. We have to do something with it or we can get challenged on that. So it would be very helpful to know what is a good linkage in the city and what areas should we spend that money? Where should we, do we give it all to parks? Is that a good use of it? Like, what should we do? That would be helpful. But to start getting into percentages and what we can't take, I think like council's direction was really like, come up with what we can save, be very cognizant that we are trying to densify and we have such a strong housing goal. And then we also have the law on that topic. I think the committee is already pushing pretty hard there.
And that's why we've been the past couple meetings just looking at option 1, 2, and 3. And after looking at our developments, I mean, that is just such a significant tree preservation over housing ordinance. Whereas that's one reason we're going to propose, or at least show the committee next week, some lower options for them to consider, because that way we can still balance housing. We still have a code that is clear and objective for tree preservation along with the mitigation.
Yeah, I mean, there's another push coming from affordable housing right now that the minimum densities we need the densities in our code raised in different zones, that they're too low to get the housing we need. So there's just these pressures right now. And I'm thinking, oh, well, I'm sitting on TRUAC that's saying we want to preserve trees. And we have another committee saying we need to increase the minimum density. So there's a lot of competing interests.
My other
there.
product is removing the density in the R8.
I know.
I got trees and removing density.
I know. And it's hard to do both.
And so the order that you're going in meeting wise was this meeting, but the process as a whole won't be completed until you have your fee in lieu and what those tree planting changes would be.
Right. So
Is that
next week's
true?
meeting is really important. That's where we're going to get the percentage, because
Mhm.
we've already defined the regulated and priority trees. Next step is the percentages. The following one is basically the committee nod ahead on the fee in lieu. And we'll look at what other cities do with that fee and discuss it, but we're not going to dive into the dollar amount. That'll be done internally on the cost of the replacement. And then the on-site replacement, we're going to look at other cities' examples. Is it 1 to 2, 2 to 1? Does it depend on the tree or the DBH? Do you match that? There's lots of different ways to look at the replacement. So that will be the meeting in end of August.
One quick thing I'm thinking about, you, Mary, asking like good ideas of how to spend that money. I'm thinking back to Pauline, what you said about a lot of those smaller developments where there aren't street tree requirements. Maybe that's looking at equity of tree canopy across the city, like pick out some of the right of ways on those types of developments where the city can go in and use that money.
The street trees, yes. And I've seen that in codes, definitely used in the right of way, roundabouts. A lot of cities, they have their own parks, so they put them in the parks, but since we're separate, it'd be different.
Go ahead, Laura.
Just in terms of the mitigation options, and I think there's the data piece to it, but there's also a community engagement piece in terms of, is it more valuable to community to have that concentrated in a park or shading for homes? So some kind of outreach piece to that I think could be helpful. And then I'm not a tree person or a developer, so I don't know how much of the constraints or that sort of perceived competition between trees and density is cost versus like physical constraints. But I think to your point, Pauline, about state funding, federal funding, if there are pieces of it that are more of a cost piece, there's a lot of new funding in urban forestry, both at the state and federal level. So I think that's worth looking into.
Yep, definitely.
And then we're gonna need to move on, but I want to see if there's anybody online, just because it's way easier for us to jump in and throw thoughts in. So if there's anybody online that has a quick comment, be welcomed. And it doesn't look like it. Great. Well,
Thank
thanks so
you.
much, Pauline.
And then if you want to send me an email with any input, that'd be great.
Yeah, and if anyone here has input or wants to, well, I won't be available, but I was gonna say wants to meet before the next meeting, but yeah, just email me.
Yeah, thank you. Our lunch is here, so we're at a nice even breaking point, but we are going to run out of time. So let's grab a quick start of lunch and then maybe get the beginning of the waste of materials talk while we're eating. That work? Okay.
Meet you guys.
All right, you're unmuted.
All right, great. So we're gonna continue to eat, but jump into the presentation because we want to have full time for this. So Kelly, I think you're planning on leading the conversation here. Nope, just kidding.
No,
Covey is.
no,
No?
it's the whole team. Is
Everybody
presenting.
is. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
We're gonna be handing off.
Well, if everyone's ready, we'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, thanks again for putting this together. As per usual, the waste group is the most organized in their presentation. So thanks for keeping that strong.
Everyone, thanks again. And thanks to the team for all the work done to pull this together. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so today we have a very in-depth presentation. We're going to be talking about an overview of the CCAP. So this is just a kind of a helpful reminder for those who haven't had the opportunity to look at it recently, and the 6 strategies that are included in the CCAP. We're going to talk about the findings that the group has completed over the last 6 months, the last year, as well as the next steps, and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A and discussion. Okay, next slide. Okay, so really at the heart of this is data, and Kavi's going to go into this in more detail, but we're starting with sector-based emissions. So we represent about 5% of the emissions. These are largely generated from the landfill. However, and Kavi, again, we'll talk about this in more detail, is consumption-based, which represents 47%. So one recommendation that we're making is as we look to update the next plan or provide input to the next plan, we should really be focused on the consumption based materials and the upstream processing of those. Go to the next slide, and I'm going to hand it to Kavi to talk in more detail about this.
Thanks, Kelly. So as Kelly mentioned, and that quote was also directly from the CCAP as well, mentioning that in 3 to 5 years, when we're doing an update, to kind of actually recommend to look at more consumption-based versus sector-based, which your current CCAP is based on. So here are just a couple charts, again, pulled from CCAP. It's also in the memo we shared that just shows the impact of the consumption-based. So this one shows the purple right there is the emissions from, or the magenta, the emissions from production of imported food, goods, and energy, which is basically things that are created or produced outside of the city limits of Bend that are consumed by folks who are living in Bend or visiting Bend. Here's another way, a more updated, this is from 2021 community greenhouse gas inventory that was shared with us earlier this year. And again, you can see on the right-hand side, the consumption-based emissions is almost equal to everything else. And this last one just breaks it down. So the last 2 bars on the right are household goods and household food. So again, shows a little bit more breakdown of where those emissions on the consumption side are coming from. And then the last thing I just wanted to share as we go through the strategies, which I'm going to hand it off to Serena to give an overview of that. But as we go through that, one of the things I think it's helpful to keep in mind is we are the waste and materials working group, and that's how CCAP has it put. But I think oftentimes it's confused with just the more recycling side of things, but also making sure we're keeping our focus on reduce, reuse, recycle, and that hierarchy. The most impact is had on the top, like the higher levels of it. So if we can reduce waste or reduce consumption in the first place, that has the largest impact versus recycling, which is helpful, but it's lower down in the hierarchy. And we've tried to keep that in mind for strategies, which I'll hand it off to Serena for.
Thank you. So when the CCAP took place, we identified 6 main strategies. Some of these have some combined efforts that we'll go into more detail on. The first one being improve non-food waste recovery, expanding use of low carbon concrete in city projects and new development. Some of that has been in testing throughout the state and other areas. There's some really good findings on that. We have improved food waste recovery, improving construction and demolition waste recovery, very big opportunities in both of those areas, as you could probably see from the previous slides. develop outreach and education materials for upstream consumption reduction, and finally, developing programs that encourage food waste prevention. A lot of these entail education and awareness, not only within the residents, but within tourists that come through and interact with our city. So we have a lot of opportunities here, but we also have a lot to educate and remind people of their impact as we move forward. Next slide. So the first one is non-food waste recovery. And sorry, Covey, am I talking through this one in detail?
No, this is just the strategy, just showing the 3 actions. I can go to the next slide when you're
Okay.
ready.
Thank you. All right, so I believe Covey, you're taking over this one specifically.
I can.
Sorry. Go for it.
Okay. So the first W1A is improve recycling at multifamily residences. And we've done some research on this. We've met with Oregon DQ. Smitha helped arrange a meeting to learn a lot more from the Recycling Modernization Act, which is what RMA stands for there. And what we've learned as we were looking into this is that the Recycling Modernization Act includes multifamily codes that will go into effect. The one issue with that is that they're going to take effect, they're going to be finalized by July of 2025 to then go into effect in July of 2026, which is still about 3 years out. So one of the things we as a working group have been considering is CCAP specifically calls for that as one of the actions to create those codes, in addition to the education and outreach that also goes along with that. But we're still considering if it makes sense to still develop those codes without having a clear idea of what the state will be working on and require cities to do, or if it makes more sense to wait for 3 years. And I think some of the things we've been considering is just that, knowing that Bend has been growing so fast and there's so many developments going up, knowing that retrofitting and making changes to have multifamily residences have recycling on site is a lot more expensive and likely not as easy to do. So waiting 3 years has a large impact in that sense. So that's something we're still considering. We're still researching, and I think it will be something we'll have to make an informed decision on which way to go, whether we should wait or proceed. Any quick questions? I think we could do quick questions along. Does that sound good to you, Kelly, and everybody else?
Yep.
We can't hear the question.
Sorry. Do we know if the multifamily codes for the Recycling Modernization Act will be retroactive? Meaning more operations wise, existing multifamily developments will have to comply? Does that make sense?
I believe it's only new construction.
Yep.
Yeah. No, because the codes haven't been created yet, but it seems like most codes are for new construction because it's so difficult and expensive.
And that's part of our hesitancy, or urgency, I should say, not hesitancy. That's part of our urgency, especially, areas that are effectively growing in so quickly. We don't want to wait 3 to 4 years for a policy to become in effect, but we also understand the challenges and time constraints and time and resources it takes to do that. So.
One consideration on that roadmap is that this isn't something simply that you can turn on, even if the infrastructure exists at the multifamily residences. There may need more trucks, more routes, and those aren't always readily available. When we spoke to them, I think they were saying that haulers were on average a year to 2 years lead time before they're able to procure them on site. So there are some other considerations.
I have a question for the city. Does the city have capacity to participate in the rulemaking for this Recycling Modernization Act?
I didn't quite hear that, Covey. You might need to answer that one.
You want to repeat it?
Maybe it's a question for Kate. Does the city have capacity to participate in that rulemaking for the act?
Is that something, and I have to confess, I don't, when is it happening? Is that?
I don't know the dates of it.
I'm sure it's something we can look into. I don't know. I don't know if that's the kind of thing Cassie would normally do on behalf of the city.
I don't have a lot of information, but I can add a little bit of what I know. So the RMA has, if I remember correctly, 2 stages of rulemaking, and there is a rulemaking advisory committee, or RAC. And there are some folks regionally who are part of it, including my boss as part of the Rethink Waste project. Udara is part of that first rulemaking advisory committee, and I think also someone from Deschutes, I think Tim from Deschutes County Solid Waste is also.
Correct. Yep, he's been actively involved in that as well.
Okay. So there are some folks regionally, but I don't know if anyone, or if Cassie, or I don't know if there's anyone from the city specifically on it. But we can definitely, the city is still able to offer input along the process. They do have opportunities to provide input.
I will say too, part of the role that we're trying to play here is to be that in between, to better understand how they're working and what they're doing and how we can support and, be a guide and a resource as a group.
Okay. Everyone okay with next slide? I want to make sure we can pace ourselves.
So I can step back in. Thanks, Covey. So this one, we do have, obviously we have some limited engagement with how we're targeting tourists specifically. The point of this is to really create a culture shift in how people see and utilize waste or reducing waste and recycling. So we have some really great projects that are in process. The survey, we have been slowly working through surveying food service and lodging establishments, better understanding their impact, how they could potentially support, what their interests are in supporting. We, as mentioned before, have ongoing discussions with the RWP and how they might expand efforts. We've met with certain stakeholders. We have a lot more to talk through, but there's a lot of opportunity here in how we can potentially do that. Some of this is education, some of this is signage, potentially some of this is more specific programs that we could talk about down the road as we further develop them in ideas. So currently our infrastructure and facility out in Deschutes County is getting pretty limited. They have been working through a new landfill. They have different options that they've been working through. As mentioned already, there's some challenges in adding routes, the amount of personnel and trucks that are needed. I think some of you have even probably seen that there's limited issues already in terms of like glass recycling not getting picked up regularly and other things that have been impacted, ongoing. So we're excited about some potential new opportunities. They are looking to expand some MRFs, create more regional focused areas for that. So as mentioned, we're just trying to stay engaged and look for opportunities, how we can support where it aligns and where, what we can do better ongoing. Next slide.
Okay.
Ellie.
Okay, I'll jump in. So just a bit of background on low carbon concrete or concrete impact for those who aren't familiar with it. According to the EPA, the cement sector is the 3rd largest industrial source of pollution. It emits more than 500,000 tons per year of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and carbon monoxide. Concrete producers are knowledgeable of materials and methods that can achieve a 40% reduction in carbon. There was a study that was kicked off in 2016 in the city of Portland, and it was to look at low carbon concrete for their sidewalks. Their phase 2, which is part of data collection, found that low carbon mixes met the city's concrete performance spec, and were well received by concrete finishers. And they were cost neutral or less expensive and are performing well in the post-project visual inspections. They were able to achieve a reduced carbon footprint of an average sidewalk ramp by 23 to 34%. So the main difference between the 100% cement and lower carbon mixes was the early strength gain. And although mixes achieved the specific compressive strength of 3000 PSI by day 14. So essentially, it took them a slightly longer, but they were well ahead of the 28-day specification that exists for concrete. The phase 3 was to establish the global warming potential thresholds, and then they were going to look to implement codes. So our recommendation is for the working group to follow up with where the city of Portland completed this. They were facing some delays from the pandemic and other challenges. But in addition to Portland, are there other activities throughout the state or the region that we may be able to learn from and implement best practices as a part of either our code or that we can help to influence in the building community?
This is me, right? So the third strategy is improving food waste recovery. There are 2 actions underneath this. The first one is curbside composting, expanding that. And then the second one is delivering educational programs. So I'll talk about each of those. In terms of expanding curbside composting, so this is one of the actions where I think we could say we've completed a significant portion of that. And there is curbside composting available across the city of Bend as part of yard waste pickup. And I want to clarify that we have completed in the sense that it's completed outside of the ECC, but it is in a state where it's completed. A couple of things I did want to share is just some information. So it's very hard for me to visualize large amounts like tons. So there's 34,000 tons of food that was landfilled last year. So even though we have composting available, there's still a very large, significant amount of compost that is or food waste that is landfilled. And just to put the equivalent there in a way that especially makes sense for all of us living here, that's the same as 18,000 Subarus per year, which is just mind-blowing to me. Some other things we learned is that there's currently 60% residential participation in yard waste pickup. This does not mean that all 60% of them are actively composting, but that they have signed up for the yard waste pickup as part of their trash service, which I think is about $5 more per month. And the numbers we got were from the waste haulers, I believe, there's about 50 commercial accounts that they have currently. So I think there's a lot more opportunity on the commercial side as well. It seems like that's not a very high number. So the next steps for us is to consider including the compost with the multifamily recycling rollout is one of the options that we want to try and kind of be ahead of the curve when we do start looking at multifamily recycling, to also see if we can include compost as part of that so it's available. But this is on just the curbside composting side of things. And then on W3B, this is the more educational programs that teach and encourage residents to compost their food waste. What we found is that there's limited work completed by the waste haulers or Deschutes County Solid Waste. The Rethink Waste Project does some outreach and awareness raising. And I do want to take this opportunity. I think there's like overlap between my roles at work and also through the ECC. So for this meeting, we're just sharing information. And I think I'm able to have some of the information from my work side as well. But in the future, if there is ever any potential for conflict of interest, and I'll be sure to mention that again as well, if there's any decisions being made as part of this work. But the Rethink Waste Project does some outreach and awareness raising. And then one of the other things we learned is that there's a demand side issue for compost, which is that they're not able to sell the compost as quickly as they need to. So we've learned that oftentimes compost is sitting there and becomes less valuable or effective over time. So we're also trying to figure out what those roadblocks are on the demand side, and if we can help increase the demand for compost as an end product as well. Because if we increase the amount of compost that's coming out, but we don't address that, then it's not going to actually be helpful. And I saw Kelly, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, and in fact, they'll end up landfilling the compost if it's not sold. And some other data points that they talked with us about are they need a better mix of food waste. As right now, they're getting a lot of yard waste, and they need more food waste, which we certainly don't want to incentivize sort of in general, but understanding the challenges that they're facing. And then the additional note of when you do the free landscape or yard waste hauling, so they have those free days at the landfill, those actually go to the landfill. They don't go to the compost, and they represent, I'm blanking on the number, but I think it was like 55 to 57% of yard waste generated in the city, which is obviously quite significant. So there's a ton of opportunity here, but until the demand for the material increases, there's little action that can be taken.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So I think in terms of next steps, I think there's still a lot of opportunity, but we need to identify how we can expand participation, diversion, and also compost usage. So kind of all three of those.
Okay, this one's me, Serena here. So expanding and developing new programs to increase recovery of construction and demolition materials. This is a significant one. There's a lot of material that gets put into the landfill each year. These are numbers by throughout the country, but there's a lot of next steps. This is an early stage one. We've done some research, but we haven't dived as deep as we have in some of these other areas, partly because there's a lot more stakeholders involved that we need to really talk to and better understand the pros and cons of what they're currently doing and how we can identify that. But there's a lot of material here that is thrown in the landfill each year. Go to the next slide. So we have in the past, I was part of the CCAP, and so early stages, we did talk to construction companies, some of the primary stakeholders. They do some of this already, not to say that some of this isn't already happening with their current processes, but a lot of things, it takes time think about a construction site, especially a demo. It's more about speed and efficiency versus organizing and packaging things in different buckets. So there's a lot of conversation there around different SOPs that could take place, processes, programs that could potentially help to mitigate some of the time constraints that might be an issue with those types of areas. We'd want to probably bring in and talk to some LEED certified experts. This is something that is a requirement in a lot of the LEED certifications. So there is processes out there that we can work through and talk through and maybe potentially develop over time. So again, we'd have to create some kind of waste management plan, what can be recycled. There's a lot of holes here in what makes sense, where we could start small and expand over time. And so there's definitely opportunities. There's also, where would this live? Would this be, what would the stakeholders be here to oversee this kind of project? So I'm giving more questions out here than I am answers, but we have had a lot of discussion around this and some research, and that's basically what we've come up with so far. The Deschutes County landfill did do a construction waste characterization study. I haven't seen those findings, but I do want to review those, and that's potentially some of our next steps, is talking through what that actually looks like in more detail, creating some potential next steps from there, and then also reviewing state policy and verifying some of those long and short-term strategies and how they can be developed, from more of a city perspective and where we're at today. Next steps, or next slide.
I think this is mine.
Yes.
This is a strategy that I don't think we've done much research into yet. It's developing outreach and education materials for upstream consumption reduction. It has two actions. One is to conduct outreach campaigns that promote waste prevention and reduce consumption, and the other is to implement training programs for specific industries to prevent waste. So next slide. So I just kind of outlined potential areas where we can do some more research for each action. So for conducting outreach campaigns, we could look into more opportunities within the community to borrow items rather than people purchasing items. I know this is already happening at some libraries and nonprofits and other organizations. We can promote organizations that repair items, either for profit or not for profit. There are these entities or events called community repair fairs that occur in other communities across the state. And there's one in Washington County that's pretty successful that we could learn more about. We could try to promote local organizations that sell used items, kind of that reuse portion of the inverted pyramid. We could increase opportunities for swaps, such as ski swaps, and then we can look into what opportunities there are for peer-to-peer sharing, whether or not we can support more of that. And then Covey's going to talk more about this later, but researching how to promote the switch between reusable items, such as single-use items, such as for coffee cups and takeout containers. Next slide, thank you. And then the other action is for implementing training programs for specific industries such as construction or restaurants or commercial businesses. And so some ideas for us to look into include looking at the city's building preservation and restoration codes. Like, you know, if buildings are easier to restore or not based on the way our codes are set up. Looking at whether or not we have a market or how to create a market for recovered and excess building materials. Which is number 3. The other industry is commercial business. We can promote waste assessments so people know what their waste streams are in their businesses. We can support green teams, which are like business teams that look at what's working, what's not working in terms of waste. Reducing unsolicited mail, selling or donating their e-waste to other organizations that can kind of refurbish it and get it back out to folks. And for restaurants, learn about opportunities to promote waste assessments as well, promote food donation, and then also promote that switch to reusable containers.
This is me, I'm guessing. So the 6th strategy was conducting outreach campaigns to promote food waste prevention. And one note, I put this in a memo as well, but we did combine the food actions as part of, I think, Cassie, when we had done the first prioritization, there was a lot of overlap between like food waste prevention, but also food recovery in terms of outreach and education at least. So some of those actions were combined as a potential for when we start working on the work plans for each of the actions. Some of the findings, again, on the food waste side. So this is food that is bought that has not ended up being used at all. Is that the USDA reports that 30 to 40% of all food is wasted. And a large majority of that is on, it says throughout the whole cycle, but about 30% or a large majority of that is on the residential retail side of it. So knowing that that's a large issue. A couple other things is that there is a National Food Waste Prevention Week that happened a couple months ago. And so the Rethink Waste Project also partners with them and does some work on this. But apart from that, I don't believe there's much work being done by any other entities or locally by the city. In terms of next steps, part of it is figuring out who would be leading this. And the plan mentions that the community partners and haulers would be the lead as part of this action. But would Deschutes County Solid Waste, the city, Rethink Waste Project, or what role can ECC play in that kind of support role? Also learn what is being done and ways to help support, expand, or initiate. And then again, part of it is tying it with the strategy W3, which is all about food waste recovery. So if we can make sure that when we're getting a message out about composting, we're also getting a message out about preventing food waste in the first place. This is also my slide. So this is a quote that I pulled that I actually randomly stumbled upon from almost 2 years ago that we got from a community member when I was searching for something in my inbox that I thought I would share. It's also in the memo, and I'll just read through it. The strategies in the Bend Community Climate Action Plan are fantastic and more than commendable, but they're not always visible. They do not necessarily help transform how we Bendites perceive the nature in our daily lives. Currently, waste is normalized and implicitly sanctioned at food trucks. But if after eating my pierogies at the Podski, I had to further sort my waste into trash, recycling, and compost, I would linger with it longer. I would think of the waste's future. I would think of its relationship, its past, the labor and resources that made it. I would think of its relationship to the public sector, to the collective funds that help transform it back into soil. I would experience myself as an agent, both an actor and a participant involved in a political reorientation of ethical living. I would be involved and I would see objects differently. And that was from Luke Donahue. And the reason to share that is just that, again, that a lot of these visible actions, I think, also have the potential for a culture shift. And people, especially residents in Bend, can see when things like that change, and it can help them kind of start re-examining how their own consumption or living habits as well. And the last part I wanted to mention was that one of the projects that we've kind of started talking about, it's still in the idea stage, is again piloting kind of reusable food and drink at food and beverage establishments, along with making composting available more widely at those same establishments, which would both significantly reduce waste and also help initiate that culture shift that I mentioned. And doing so would potentially lead to progress on these three actions. So you heard a lot about all different strategies, but this is something more tangible that we may be able to accomplish in the next year or so if we decided to move forward on that. So there's some time for questions, general questions, and then there are some discussion questions we also have if needed. And if there's no questions, I can just go to the next slide. Okay, so some of the discussion questions, and these are pretty, I just jotted down some that came to mind, but it's pretty open to any other questions or discussion topics. But the first one was just multi-family recycling codes that we mentioned. If there's a committee, we want to make an informed decision, so we'll still be doing more research and kind of also seeing if the city has appetite to move forward on that in the first place. Or if there's a strong reason that a city should. But we also want to know if the committee has a strong preference or thoughts on that.
Thanks for the cue. I was trying to look back in the notes and figure out the thing that I had a comment on. So my thought with the Recycling Modernization Act and the kind of the impending code amendment in 2026 for multifamily is either, if there is some clear direction of what that code would look like, or at least the outcomes of that code would look like, if there's an opportunity, since most multifamily dwellings are going through some plan review of like providing the education like upfront for the, like as a voluntary, like this is what's coming, this is best practice, and in 2026 you're going to have to do it anyways. So if there's an opportunity to try to shift some of that adoption curve earlier rather than waiting until 2026. So that was one question, and I don't know if that's possible, but I know, but that was kind of one of my thoughts with the upcoming code. And then also, shifting the focus from new construction to, I guess that would be, or shifting the focus from new construction to what solutions or what support could be provided for existing multifamily facilities that don't have that. And I don't know what the barriers or benefits are there, but those are my two thoughts on that.
Did you want to take that, Covey? I do have what I don't remember exactly. I'd have to look back at our notes, but my understanding is they really haven't done much in terms of developing strategy or code potentials for multifamily. I think we asked that question specifically when we had that meeting. They're really focused on that first phase before they dive into that second phase, which would be the multifamily. So there's not a lot out there or written or developed to kind of use as a guide at this time. But that was our impression too, that we'd like to maybe use what they have as kind of a starting point.
Thanks, Serena. I think that's accurate. That's my understanding too. And I think one other thing I'll add is I think I asked the question specifically because some cities in Oregon, including the city of Portland, do I think already have codes. And I guess what I asked was, I'm guessing the state will try to draw from those codes that already exist in some of the larger cities to try and kind of stay in line. If anything, maybe be if I don't know about a city of Portland code, but if it's too ambitious, maybe probably be less ambitious than that, I'm guessing, just because it'd be a statewide code for larger cities. But it sounds like exactly like Serena said, they're still focusing on the materials list for recycling and some of the other aspects of phase 1. So they haven't looked at phase 2. So I don't think they were able to they don't even have that. It will be created by another rulemaking advisory committee as well. So we'll go through a whole process, I think, similarly to what they're doing right now. But I did, I think to your point, Neil, I think that's something we could do is look at other cities and kind of if you were in line with that, I think it would be fair to say that it would still be consistent with whatever the state would be creating, if other cities in Oregon already have that.
And maybe not, actually having a regulation, even if it's voluntary, is an onerous process that we probably wouldn't want to do with legislation coming down. But there's some directive that the RMA designated that's, even if it's 2 sentences in it that says, and there will be a code provided, that has some bounds on it. So that's the only piece that you need. And then sharing voluntary best practices, in my mind, until that regulation comes out, anything more than that is a reinventing of the wheel and sounds counterproductive. But just, these are what the best practices are, and regulation around this will be coming in 2026 is the education. Whether that education is useful, I think that would also kind of require a little bit more research and interviews and some stuff like that. But that would be the path that I would suggest.
Yeah, I like the idea, just the education piece. If we decide not to proceed with the code piece, which I think is harder. So I think that makes sense.
And I think as part of that educational piece, understanding what are the things that are hardest to retrofit, and what are the things that are really important to be done during construction versus after the fact, once there's a code in existence.
Any other thoughts on that first question before I prompt the second one? So the second one is there's a lot of educational programs and outreach programs especially in this section of CCAP. And I know Cassie has mentioned this previously. Part of it has been, I think part of what CASC did when they created CCAP was to kind of keep that open-ended and let this committee determine what would make the most sense. Is it something where we're supporting external programs or other organizations or entities to lead those, or supporting other entities who are doing that work? Or is this something where ECC wants to play more of a leadership role? And I think it would depend program to program for some of these actions, but just in general, does the committee have strong feelings one way or the other?
I can start there and say my personal thoughts outside of being part of this subcommittee is that, education material takes a lot of effort, design, content, and there's obviously areas where you can bring support and content and assets to that. I really think utilizing a partner would allow for a little bit more bandwidth, and then supporting it with kind of like a co-brand for city, being able to build and say that the city supports this language, supports this project or this program, but utilizing people that are out there doing that work best already. That's my personal thoughts on it. I'll open it up.
And we also did contribute to the Rethink Waste program. I think if I remember correctly, the contributions made from the city will lead to an additional 8+ programs, all focused on educating and in the recycling.
Yes.
And it seems like in the past, that's generally been the strategy that the city has wanted to utilize, is using outside partners for education and outreach. But I also like the idea of a kind of city, when it's city-led or funded or oriented project, of having some sort of connection brand. So then it does kind of still carry more of the weight, even if it's outsourced, that it's carrying some of the weight of the city's initiative rather than just supporting things that are happening outside.
And
Exactly.
And it's I mean, this isn't a decision like we have to make right now. It can
No. These are questions, just kind of guiding, just general thoughts on what the committee is thinking or feeling helps us to hone in on kind of where we should be putting our efforts for further research and stakeholder discussions. There's no official discussion or no official decision making here. It's more of just general thoughts and feelings, since what you've heard so far today.
And to help us identify what next steps or recommendations might be.
Just one other general thought in this area is, we're relying on other organizations, the county for the landfill and the waste haulers that y'all have described and explained. So it almost seems like there needs to be coordination. Like if the city's going to go out and educate about, hey, you should compost more food waste, then we shouldn't do that alone. There needs to be a conversation with the waste haulers and the landfill, who are actually the ones dealing with that waste that we're asking to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Infrastructure is such a key part of all of this, and understanding what exists today, what the challenges are, and what is in development. For example, Serena had mentioned that there's potential for another MRF right now, or I believe all of our recycling material is trucked over to the Portland area, most of Eastern Oregon, that's the same. And they're talking about putting, another facility on this side. So there's a lot that's potentially on the roadmap, and staying aware of those and ensuring that we're building a program that contributes positively to that infrastructure development will be important. We don't want to set the city up or the residents up for something that can't be achieved. That's only going to lead to sort of the opposite outcome.
Just a quick note, I don't know if it was, the MRF is a material recovery facility, in case anyone's wondering.
Thanks, Kelsey.
We get used to acronyms working with this information. I want to be mindful of time since we have one last agenda item. Any last thoughts before we pass it on?
I guess I have a quick question, and I think I've asked you this before, but I still obviously have a lot to learn about what the committee's doing and plans to do. But in conversations around educational programs and messaging around especially consumption reduction or upstream consumption reduction and food waste and composting, have there been conversations around also education and messaging on the climate impact of food itself as a means to reduce our impact?
Yeah, that's part of that full life cycle of grow, purchase, use, waste. That's that full life cycle of it. We've been kind of focusing on, certain aspects, but we do understand that the life cycle of it from start to finish needs to be addressed. If I understood the question right.
Yeah, I think I was just trying to understanding and make sure that that's part of the conversation. So thanks.
I will say too, as Covey mentioned in one of the last slides, the potential programming for a reuse program for food. And we're thinking specific to kind of like the food truck courts and things like that, where there's a lot of paper takeout. There was that comment about the one resident, who said that they would think about things differently. You think about the concerts, there's a lot of waste, both in food and container, that happens. And we have a lot of those, and everyone loves those spaces. It would be a prime opportunity to work with some potential partners. And we already have kind of started some brainstorming on that, as Covey mentioned, identifying some potential opportunities there for creating some kind of program and piloting something. And so I think that would be a really strong message. And it ticks a lot of those boxes, as mentioned, at least 3, if not more, because there's an educational piece that, goes beyond that. So just another personal thought on top of everything else.
All right, I think we can wrap it up then, and I'll pass it back to Neil.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have 10 minutes left. We're gonna go through these pretty quickly. We have we've been asked to designate, I know the last meeting we talked about the climate friendly equitable communities rulemaking. We had a presentation from city staff on that. And then they're working on designating what the climate friendly areas, which is one piece of that rulemaking process. And they're looking for 1 to 2 members from the ECC to be a part of that working group. And I think they're looking for us to just nominate them, not like tree code where they wanted us to apply. So is there interest on the committee? Oh, go ahead. Or questions?
Maybe Alex is asking the same question.
I was just gonna ask if you could provide a little more background on the working group.
Yes. So climate friendly areas are part of the state rulemaking that cities are going to have to establish and identify these areas in the city that will have to, amongst other things, provide climate friendly dense urban environments that will provide the capacity to accommodate at least 30% of future housing demand, and have other requirements around other pieces of those goals. And so the long range planning team is working on that process and gave a presentation last month about it. But the working group, I think that these meetings we're planning on, I know we had asked for some updates, but it was, here are the meetings.
And Laura and Alex, my apologies. I should have sent you a link to that presentation this group got from our growth management division back in June. I will do that tomorrow so you can get that presentation. Yeah, this is just what the invitation looks like. This is going to be a working group that will be providing input at the staff level. As far as what the commitment is, it's intended to be 1 meeting a month, probably a 2-hour commitment, August to November. Let me see if I can make that bigger for you.
So I'm interested in doing this one as well. It's also related to some of the other conversations that a lot of the conversations in one of the other committees that I'm in, the system development charge, is talking about future growth and impact. So I think it's somewhat related, but I think that we definitely should, if we're being invited to provide 1 or 2 members, I think we can and should do both. It would be great to collaborate. I also don't have to be there if there's 2 other members that are interested.
I'm interested as well. Kind of fits my background, and I've followed the CFAC rules. And I'm thinking back to what I said in my introduction at the beginning of this meeting, how I'm suddenly feeling like I'm not doing enough volunteering on such things. So I'd be happy to do it.
Any other interest online? Okay.
I'm wondering if you could provide a little, like, how often do we get these kinds of requests?
Right.
That would.
Every month or every other month. I don't know if that's always a thing, but there's probably a cycle of sorts, but there are lots of opportunities. I don't know what will be coming up next. Actually, is Mark, are you on? Yeah, perfect. Mark just had the first meeting of the Transportation Utility Fee Roundtable Working Group. I don't remember what designation it officially got. But do you want to give a quick update of that? Both for us to have context of that process that's happening, but also as an example of what that developed.
Yeah, thanks. Sure. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I've been having a little trouble with connection audio. Do I sound okay? Okay, great. Yeah, we had the first meeting of the Transportation Utility Fee Roundtable yesterday morning. It was an impressive group, entire city council and mayor, and most of the key leadership and the city staff. It's supposed to be 2, potentially 3 to 4 hour meetings to discuss the options that the city is considering, both in terms of how to generate the funds in terms of the rate structure, as well as how to prioritize use of the funds. In this case, the issue is a decline in revenue, in particular from gas tax with increased EV use and similar, and generally trying to deal with a budget gap while still trying to put some priorities on the top priorities in the transportation system plan, in particular for funding needs that are tied to operation and maintenance, sort of besides the major capital investments. There is a key, I'd say a pretty strong emphasis among the roundtable members in general around pedestrian and bike improvements for effectiveness of the options, safety of the options, so improving accessibility and safety for sidewalks and bike paths throughout the city, and in terms of availability around year-round and safety year-round. So we'll have our next session in next month, and it'll focus on equity, and then there'll possibly be a third session. Yeah, I think I'll probably have more next time, but happy to have any individual conversations if anyone has some input for the tough process. Thanks, Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And that was an example of one where there was an ask, and we kind of had an idea of what it was, and it ended up being maybe larger, more formal than expected. Yeah, that was one of the updates. I'll also add that I think we're on meeting 6 of the system development charge working group subcommittee roundtable. And it was only supposed to be 3 meetings or 4 with a 4th optional. So just sometimes these scale. And also, like, I don't have time to go over that as a whole, but I've been serving on that. So if anybody has interest in that, I ran into Mark at a concert last night, and we were planning on meeting up to talk about some of those things. So if there's, especially with these committees, you can get really deep down like topics, because that's what they're for. And so if there's interest in the committee on those topics, feel free to reach out to whoever the designee is and talk through some of those pieces. Looking at time, I wanted to see if we could look at our agenda for the next couple meetings. Oh, which piece? The CFAC?
The 2 members.
Yeah, with that, are there other, if there's other interest, you can say now, or you also can email Kate or myself after the fact.
Sounds good.
Great. Okay. Then agenda review. Next meeting in September, the energy working group, which is Andrew, Lauren, and myself, will be doing our presentation similar to this one, but maybe less we've got a high bar we're gonna hit. And also, I think one of the agenda items is talking about this bike rack concept that's been bounced around a number of times, and having more of those conversations, or saving some agenda time for that, that Covey will be participating in. Leading.
I just wanted to add, I think this was already communicated maybe to the two new members, but since you're not part of any working groups, I think the decision made
Right.
was that you would wait until the next presentation, then decide which one you wanted to join. But if you have interest in joining one of the ones prior to that, if you're already interested in, say, waste materials or transportation, and you don't need 2 years of energy part, then you're welcome to maybe reach out to any of us or all of
Yeah.
us.
Is there somewhere, and I apologize because maybe I should have already tried to find this, is there somewhere that lists the different, or can I just email you to find out kind of what they all are?
Sure, yeah, there's only 3. So you saw
Oh,
a third
okay.
today.
Got it.
Transportation presented in June. But yeah, I know that the energy working group would welcome you they're still pulling their materials together for the next
Oh,
meeting.
yeah.
So if you actually want to step in and just join that process, you certainly would be welcome. But yeah, I can send you a list and some links.
Okay.
And I think part of that could be sharing the transportation working group's memo and presentation that they did before you joined too, if that's helpful.
I guess I'll just send you the whole June meeting.
I would appreciate that too. please.
Sure
Thank
thing.
you.
And as a part of this agenda review, and also kind of related to the bike rack, is if there are topics that folks are interested in discussing and want to propose, sometimes we'll come to a meeting and say, hey, it looks like we're going to have a pretty light meeting next month because we're saving this for October. Does the group have anything that we particularly want to pull? The bike rack is like a list of potential topics. So if there are things that are coming up that folks want to have a discussion about or propose for an agenda, the opportunity will be there. I'll say that since we're kind of working through this summer time period where Cassie's on parental leave, and we're talking about prioritizing through these different groups, this does provide the opportunity for, like, just looking at this, once we have our September meeting, coming to that with some ideas for the next month might be helpful. Or if there's anything that comes up, in looking at these presentations or with the subgroups where you're like, oh, I actually think we could have a short discussion on this one topic. Like, I want to come back because I had this meeting and I'd really love to dive in on low carbon concrete or whatever that is, especially if it's in the climate action plan, then that's even more relevant. We did pretty good. Jam-packed meeting. Do you have something to say, Mary? You're smiling. Okay, great. All right. Well, if there's are there any other comments with folks online? Thank you for participating. Doesn't look like it. So thank you all. Meeting